Chapter 1. Louis XIV of France, the Sun King who hated baths. Louis XIV, 1638 to 1715, the self-declared Sun King, reigned over France with dazzling grandeur. He built Versailles, a palace so lavish it became the symbol of absolute monarchy. But Louis had one glaring contradiction beneath all that gold and lace. He hated bathing. In 17th century France, water was considered dangerous to health. Doctors warned that it opened the pores, letting in disease. Louis took that advice to heart, perhaps too much. Records show he bathed only a few times in his entire life. Instead, he relied on perfume. The royal court reeked, but luxuriously so. The Sun King owned over 200 perfumes, applying them daily to mask the body's natural aroma of power and sweat. He also had his royal lever, the morning ritual in which nobles would watch him wake, dress, and eat breakfast. Courtiers fought for the privilege of handing him a sock or holding his sleeve. For Louis, life was theater, and every movement, even scratching his leg, was a performance of divine majesty. Cleanliness may not have been next to godliness, but fashion, scent, and ceremony were.
Chapter 2. Queen Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, and her poisoned paint. Elizabeth I, 1533 to 1603, ruled England with fierce intelligence and political cunning, but her beauty routine was deadly. To maintain her famous pale complexion, a sign of nobility in her time, Elizabeth used Venetian ceruse, a white foundation made of lead and vinegar. It gave her a porcelain glow, but slowly poisoned her skin and bloodstream. Historians note her skin grew cracked and discolored. She covered it with even more lead paint. Her teeth, once pearly, blackened, her hair thinned. Yet Elizabeth refused to appear imperfect. Vanity and power were intertwined. In her later years, she demanded that no mirrors be allowed in her chambers. Her daily routine also included meticulous wardrobe changes. She owned over 3,000 gowns, many embroidered with pearls and gems. Servants kept logs detailing which dress she wore and when, an early form of brand management centuries before Instagram. Behind the fierce monarch who defeated the Spanish Armada was a woman slowly poisoned by the very image of power she created. Chapter 3. King Henry VIII. Appetite, Anger, and the Throne of Explosions. King Henry VIII, 1491 to 1547, is remembered for his 6 wives, his break with the Catholic Church, and his culinary enthusiasm. Henry began as an athletic, handsome prince, but as his reign progressed, his appetite grew legendary and lethal. By his 40s, he consumed around 5,000 calories per meal, feasting on roasted swan, eel pies, and sugar sculptures. Exercise vanished, gout and ulcers arrived. He became paranoid and tyrannical, executing wives, advisors, and even old friends. Yet his most shocking habit emerged after death. His body reportedly exploded in the coffin due to internal gases oozing fluids onto the church floor. Chroniclers saw it as divine justice. Henry also had peculiar bathroom habits. He built privy chambers with padded velvet seats and special servants known as the grooms of the stool, whose sole duty was to attend him during his most private moments. This job was, oddly, one of the most powerful at court, proof that proximity to power, no matter the circumstance, was everything.
Chapter 4. King James VI of Scotland, James I of England, germophobic genius. King James, 1566 to 1625, the first ruler of both England and Scotland, was an intellectual monarch, fluent in Latin, theology, and demonology. But he was also a walking bundle of peculiar fears. James was terrified of witches and disease. He wrote an entire book, Demonology, outlining how to spot and punish witches. He personally oversaw witch trials in Scotland, convinced they had tried to sink his ship. When it came to hygiene, James believed water was unhealthy, a popular idea of the era, so he rarely bathed or washed his hands. Yet he changed his clothes frequently, thinking that clean clothes were equivalent to a clean body. He also despised tobacco. After Sir Walter Raleigh popularized it, James published a counterblast to tobacco, calling smoking a custom loathsome to the eye, hateful to the nose, harmful to the brain. A royal PR nightmare for the early tobacco industry. Still, his paranoia extended to security. He slept with multiple locks on his doors, hated knives at the table, and preferred eating alone. A germaphobe centuries before sanitizer was cool.
Chapter 5. Peter the Great of Russia. Reform by Razor and Rebellion. Peter the Great, 1672 to 1725, modernized Russia, dragging it into the modern European world through sheer will and occasionally terror. His personal habits, however, were as extreme as his politics. Peter was obsessed with beards, specifically cutting them off. When he toured Western Europe, he noticed how clean-shaven gentlemen looked. Upon returning home, he imposed the infamous beard tax. Nobles had to pay to keep their beards, and carry a medal proving payment, engraved with a mustache and the words, "The beard is a superfluous burden." He also created the all-joking, all-drunken synod of fools and jesters, a club of nobles forced to participate in obscene drinking rituals. Peter once made courtiers drink to the point of collapse and occasionally autopsied bodies afterward, as he was fascinated by anatomy. His reformist zeal extended to surgery. Peter performed tooth extractions himself, not as a trained dentist, but as a hobby. He carried pliers and practiced on servants, soldiers, and even random passers-by. For him, modernization was personal and occasionally painful.
Chapter 6. Queen Christina of Sweden, the gender-defying intellectual. Queen Christina, 1626 to 1689, was one of Europe's most unconventional rulers. Brilliant, bold, and utterly unpredictable. She ascended the throne at age 6, ruling a nation at war and shocking everyone with her habits. Christina refused traditional femininity. She dressed in men's clothing, avoided marriage, and preferred philosophy to flirtation. Her daily life was equally unusual. She reportedly slept only 3 hours a night, waking before dawn to read, write, and discuss metaphysics with scholars. Her apartments were cluttered with books, manuscripts, and half-finished projects. At meals, she rarely ate in company, often pacing or reading aloud instead. Her decision to abdicate the throne in 1654, shocking Europe, stemmed partly from her exhaustion with ceremonial life. She left Sweden disguised as a man, converted to Catholicism, and spent her remaining years as a cultural patron in Rome. Christina's eccentricity wasn't madness. It was intellect too large for the narrow corsets of monarchy. Chapter 7. King George III, the Mad Monarch and His Botanical Fixation. King George III, 1738 to 1820, the ruler who lost America, was far from the tyrant many revolutionaries painted him as. In reality, he was a gentle, intelligent man with an astonishingly odd love for agriculture and botany. George rose before dawn to walk his gardens, chatting to farmers about crop rotation. He was so obsessed with plants that the public jokingly called him Farmer George. But as his mental illness worsened, now believed to be a form of bipolar disorder or porphyria, his quirks grew more intense. He began to talk incessantly for hours, sometimes to trees. During one episode, he greeted an oak as His Majesty the King of Prussia.
He also had a habit of repeating words, what, and writing enormous letters filled with endless, tangled sentences. Despite his declining mind, he remained deeply moral, insisting his meals be simple and refusing any mistresses, an oddity among monarchs of his age. He spent his final years blind and mentally detached, yet surrounded by his plants at Windsor Castle. His gardens remain, to this day, a quiet legacy of a man whose mind wandered, but whose heart stayed rooted in the soil.
Chapter 8. Emperor Nero, the performer who played as Rome burned. If there were an Olympic event for royal eccentricity, Nero Claudius Caesar, 37 to 68 CE, would take the gold and then have the judges executed. Nero saw himself not as a ruler, but as an artist. He performed on stage, sang in public, and forced senators to attend his theatrical productions. Clapping was mandatory, under penalty of death. He entered Olympic chariot races and always won, even when he fell off his chariot. He commissioned massive statues of himself as a god and demanded his portrait appear on nearly everything, from coins to door handles. But his strangest and darkest habits came with his unchecked narcissism. He reportedly had dinner parties that lasted from dusk till dawn, filled with theatrical lighting, perfumes, and mechanical ceilings that rained flower petals. When the Great Fire of Rome broke out in 64 CE, ancient historians claim he performed with his lyre as the city burned. Though modern scholars debate the accuracy, it perfectly fit his image. Nero's eccentricity eventually turned monstrous. He executed his mother, his wife, and countless nobles. His final words before suicide? "What an artist dies in me." History agreed, but not as he intended.
Chapter 9. King Ludwig II of Bavaria, the dreaming king of castles. Few monarchs blurred the line between dream and delusion like Ludwig II of Bavaria, 1845 to 1886, the fairy tale king. Introverted and shy, Ludwig detested court life. Instead, he retreated into his imagination, constructing fantastical palaces inspired by mythology and opera, including the world-famous Neuschwanstein Castle, later the model for Disney's Sleeping Beauty Castle. His schedule was pure nocturnal fantasy. He slept all day and stayed awake all night, wandering candlelit halls or riding through the forest in moonlight. He dined alone, insisting meals be served to him on a mechanical table that rose through the floor so servants wouldn't disturb him. Ludwig was obsessed with composer Richard Wagner, funding his operas to near bankruptcy. His letters to Wagner read like those of a man in a fever dream, full of poetic longing and idealism. He spoke to himself often, avoided his ministers, and eventually spent most of his fortune building castles he never lived in. Declared insane, he was dethroned and mysteriously found dead in a lake soon after, alongside his doctor. To this day, many Bavarians regard him not as mad, but as a visionary trapped in the wrong era, a dreamer king who built monuments to beauty instead of power.
Chapter 10. Emperor Rudolph II, the collector of the strange and supernatural. Long before Ludwig, another Central European monarch ruled from his own private universe, Rudolph II, Holy Roman Emperor, 1552 to 1612. Rudolph turned Prague Castle into the world's strangest museum. His cabinet of curiosities contained mechanical automata, taxidermy of mythical creatures, rare gems, magical artifacts, and even alleged pieces of Noah's Ark. He surrounded himself with astrologers, alchemists, and mystics, including the famed John Dee. He believed he could transmute metal into gold and communicate with angels. Yet, his obsession isolated him. He often refused to meet his ministers for months, preferring to stare at astronomical charts or dissect animals. He also had a peculiar fixation with dwarfs and giants. collecting both as court entertainers along with exotic animals. His court was said to resemble a circus of intellect and oddity. Though he was labeled eccentric, Rudolph's legacy as a patron of science and art is immense. He sponsored Kepler and other great minds. His strange habits, though mocked, helped fuel the early modern scientific revolution.
Chapter 11. Queen Victoria. Mourning as a lifestyle. If grief were an art form, Queen Victoria, 1819 to 1901, was its grand master. After the death of her beloved husband, Prince Albert, in 1861, she entered mourning and never left it. For 40 years, Victoria wore only black. She refused public appearances, shunned court festivities, and insisted that Albert's rooms be kept exactly as he left them. Every morning, his clothes were laid out, his shaving water prepared, and his chair set for meals, as if he might return any minute. She even had a portrait of Albert beside her bed and a cast of his hand, which she held when she prayed. Ministers found her increasingly difficult to reach as she retreated into her private sorrow. Her intense mourning changed British culture. Black became fashionable, funerals elaborate, and sentimental jewelry with locks of hair a popular keepsake. But Victoria also developed some odd personal routines. She had a near obsessive fondness for John Brown, a Scottish servant whose bluntness she adored. She gave him private quarters and medals, scandalizing the court. After her death, a photograph of Brown was found among her jewels, proof of a loyalty beyond protocol. Victoria's eccentric grief, though strange, was profoundly human. Love fossilized in ritual.
Chapter 12. The Epilogue. Crowns, Eccentricity, and the Price of Power. So why were history's monarchs so weird? Power magnifies personality. In the royal echo chamber, quirks go unchallenged and grow into habits, then into legends. Surrounded by sycophants, sheltered from ordinary life, rulers began to live according to their own physics, or a man could tax beards, talk to trees, or bathe once a decade without anyone daring to object. Many of these habits were coping mechanisms, for isolation, for pressure, for the crushing loneliness of ruling millions. Louis XIV's theatrical routines were control disguised as ceremony. Elizabeth's poisonous makeup masked vulnerability. Ludwig's fantasy castles were escapes from politics. Their eccentricities remind us that monarchy, for all its splendor, is a fragile theater, and its actors are often trapped by the very roles they play. Even today, the fascination endures. The tabloids that stalk modern royals are the same crowd that once whispered about Henry VIII's waistline or Victoria's mourning veil. The stage has changed, but the audience still loves a royal quirk. Because deep down, we know, behind every golden crown beats a human heart, and sometimes it beats just a little off rhythm.